All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello. We are going to get started. I'm Elizabeth Pruch, and this is Virtual Voices. Thank you again for a lot of you joining again. We've seen a lot of familiar names and faces on here. We started Virtual Voices when quarantine started as a way to keep our alumni engaged and connected. We have gone from talking about how COVID has impacted industries, heard from leaders on the front lines. We are constantly creating new discussions that we can have with all of the new awakening around racial inequities that has come up. A lot of conversations, of course, are geared towards that now. So Virtual Voices may stay with us for quite a while. It's proven to be a very useful way to keep folks engaged and create some really wonderful discussions and content. So this morning, I will introduce our speakers here in a moment, but I want to start off with some housekeeping reminders. This is a Zoom session and we will record it. We will email it out to you about 48 hours from now so you can share this content with others, post it on social, or just refer back to it. I would ask that we all stay on mute. We're all professionals at Zoom at this point, so that we can honor each other's voices and hear a little bit better. If you have any questions throughout this call, please do add them into the chat feature. I will call on you to unmute and ask that question aloud. The more conversation or just resources and interaction in the chat feature, the more excitement this will really host. So use that chat feature as much as you'd like. I do recommend you all switching to speaker view, found in the upper right-hand corner. That just gives you a better idea of who's talking and when, so we get to know those folks. And if you need any help, I try to say that. If you need any technical help, please feel free to private message Megan Vivier. Hi, Megan. She is hosting this for us from a technical side, so let her know if you need any help. I want to thank our sponsors. We simply could not do this. In this day and age, money is being spent in many different ways. We have 3 spectacular corporate partners that have really shown how much they care and value what we do here at the Leadership Foundation. Molson Coors, I think Kayla Garcia is on the call. They've been a part of what we do for many years, and we couldn't be more appreciative of everything they offer us. Southwest Airlines, fantastic partner of ours. They give a lot to our Leading Colorado Scholarship Fund and help us with our Lex trip. They do so much for us. And a newer partner of ours connected to our alumni engagement is TIAA. Wonderful thought partners in everything that we do with alumni work, and just a tremendous partner in the community and specifically with us. So thank you so much to our sponsors. We really appreciate you guys. Okay, now I get to introduce our speakers. We are very thrilled to have these 3 brilliant women with us today to talk about storytelling. This is what our thoughts are today and how important storytelling is now more than ever. This will kind of dictate what history books write about us, right? This is how we tell our stories now are going to make a big difference. So let me introduce you to first Sarah Hogan. She's the resident word nerd, as she puts it, which I love, and co-founder of Barefoot PR. They're a group of purpose-driven storytellers who work with nonprofits, foundations, government agencies, and companies focused on community impact. As a proud graduate of Leadership Denver 2019, the greatest lesson she's learned from that experience was to step into the arena without considering failure. And when she's not at work, you can find her reading long articles on her iPad, listening to podcasts, volunteering in the community, or building Legos with her kiddo. Thank you, Sarah, so much for joining us. Also with Barefoot PR, co-founder Cori Streetman. She co-founded Barefoot in 2010 with the hopes of changing the face of public relations to include a more holistic approach. She's incredibly passionate about integrating community investment into brand building and culture development. Incredibly important thing right now, especially. She's dedicated her time and talent to the nonprofit sector for many years, serving in volunteer leadership roles and presenting on various topics amid and strengthening the nonprofit sector. She's also a proud mother of 2 boys, and in partnership with her husband, they work hard to instill the value of community into her family's everyday world, and I admire you for that. Look at that, LD in the house. That's great, LD19. Well, Blair also has something to say about Leadership Denver. But Blair Nelson is a passionate storyteller, strong collaborator, and a thought leader. Her strong belief in a brand as a business approach has helped drive results in the news business, positively shift corporate cultures, and impact external audiences. clients and business partners. She has been with Tegna for 5 years, and 1.5 of those years we've got her here in Colorado at 9 News. Also an amazing partner of ours at the Leadership Foundation, specifically with our Leading Colorado Luncheon. Blair is a Texan. She's a wonderful Texan who enjoys traveling the world, hosting dinner parties, and playing soccer. And she was just telling us she's becoming more Coloradan by going glamping recently. So she's getting there. Thank you, ladies. We are so happy to have the 3 of you here. I'm going to start us off by asking Sarah, you our first question. And again, a reminder to the audience, if you have questions yourself, please feel free to put those in the chat feature at any time and I will call on you. So Sarah, I'm going to start with you. We are seeing a lot of statements out there, right? We have seen companies come out with, 4 months ago, statements about COVID and now racial inequities. Can you talk to us about how you're guiding your clients to not just make statements, but to actually follow up on those statements with some action?
Absolutely. First off, I'm so excited to be here to talk about one of my favorite topics, storytelling. Those of you who know me know how deeply passionate and connected I am to this topic, not just at work, but in my own life. And I hope to be raising a small storyteller at home. And at age 5, I think he's going pretty far. We might have to rein that in. So I think this is such an interesting time. And, our team has really thought long and hard, I think, especially at the start of COVID, about what we need to say or what our clients need to say on behalf of the community. And I have to say that while there is a lot more pressure and certainly a lot more pressing need for certain kinds of information, it really goes back to sort of those basic principles of communicating. And one of the first things I like to talk to people about is, are people actually asking you to respond or to, communicate something? Or are you just feeling pressure or a need to sort of perform or kind of go along with the crowd? And I think that's a really basic and fundamental principle of, crisis communications or just sort of general communications in overall. And I think, breaking COVID and sort of the Black Lives Matter movement out kind of differently and separately. I think in the situation of COVID, there were a lot of really, really important and necessary actions to communicate for health and safety for a lot of organizations. And so we really sort of dug in and said, what do people need to know? Bring that action forward, refer to really credible sources, there was a lot of it out there, and just say what you need to say and get in and get out for health and safety. When it comes to sort of thinking about Black Lives Matter and racial justice, I think that those comments are really loaded. We really asked a lot of our clients who felt that pressure to communicate to start on the inside and to say, what are you really doing in this moment? Or have you not yet addressed this? And if you haven't yet addressed it, I'm not so sure that taking a public statement is really the right thing to do, because I think people see right through it. I think a lot of us had full inboxes and we're like, yeah, great, you stand with, but where were you like 6 months ago standing with this movement? And so if you haven't committed to an action, I think you don't say something until you have something to follow through on and to say, here's what we're doing in those moments. I think, just to give you an example, we had a client who was under some extreme board pressure to release a statement, mostly because they were getting board members who were like, look at what this nonprofit did and look at what this nonprofit did. What are we going to say? And we had a long, hard conversation that just pressure from board members doesn't equal like the need to take action. And frankly, they had made zero commitment to looking at board or program or, even staff. They have a small staff, but staff diversity and inclusion and those efforts. And I was like, listen, you can't follow this up. Like, you need to really, let's talk about that conversation before you talk about the need. And so we gave them some good language to go back directly to board members and say, great, I'm glad you brought this up. This is a great time for us to talk about the need to actually change something fundamentally wrong with who we are as an organization. And let's go there first. So I think that's really kind of how we've been advising clients. The power of this moment is that, maybe this is my own lack of courage, but I feel like it is easier to have those kinds of conversations now where people's ears are sort of attuned to that dialogue than it's ever been in the past. And so, you know, really being able to push hard and to challenge what people are asking for in this moment. You know, I think our entire team, I'll really congratulate them. They've been standing forward and really diving in and asking those tough questions and being more direct about those tough questions than ever before.
Sarah, I love that you bring up courage, because you're right. Without this being so front and center, that courage has been hard for a lot of people to find, and now it is. It's what everybody is talking about, and so it's become easier. And
I want to be really clear that that courage is, you know, coming from my perspective as a white woman from whom, you know, the system has really worked for the most part. And I also want to give credit to a handful of advocates and friends that I've had in my own life who, you know, for years have been knocking down doors and asking people, trying to educate and to move people forward. And so I don't want to say like, wow, thank you, please give me a pat on the back for the courage that I've had in this moment. But I feel like it's their work that has been enabled me to have that kind of courage. And really, I want to throw back to a handful of those people who have been doing this a lot longer than I have.
No, that's great. Thank you. Thank you. Cori, I want to ask you a question. You know, we each have both a personal story and a professional story. Can you talk to us a little bit about how we can balance the two stories during such important times? Because sometimes they can be slightly different, but is there a way we can mesh them and work together on them?
Absolutely. Well, and first, I just want to say thanks again for having all of us here today. It's really great to have this platform to have these kind of conversations. So thank you for facilitating it. And this question, I've thought a lot about. It's one of my favorite topics to discuss. You know, I think that so often people feel like there isn't a place for the personal life in the world of business and vice versa. And I actually really disagree with that. You know, I think that when you take a step back and you think about what makes you authentic as a person, you know, you have this whole story to tell. And if you're really only your true self when you're able to pull from these different elements in your life, and even in normal times outside of pandemic and so much unrest, you know, it's important to think about the ways in which you can present your full story. And as a result of being able to do that, you find connections with others in ways that I think you would never really find if you weren't open about all these different things. Now, that doesn't mean you need to be an oversharer. You know, Sarah and I and our team, we present this topic in a number of ways, you know, of how to build your own personal brand, tell your own personal story. And we always say, like, you don't want to be the oversharer in the room. But there are ways to find that emotional connection with someone else and really be able to showcase that authenticity. So, you know, one thing I was thinking about, and Sarah and I were actually talking before this presentation, just, you know, authenticity is a word that I think gets used a lot. But oftentimes I think people don't have a way to sort of check if they're being authentic. And I was trying to brainstorm kind of a list of things that, you know, you can run through your head when you're putting together your message or you're putting together your story or you're connecting with someone on a topic. How can you be sure that authenticity is kind of front and foremost, you know, right out there for someone to see? You know, it kind of harks back to what Sarah was just saying too. When you're putting these statements out there, if you haven't already been having that as part of your culture, it's really easy to see that that promise or that statement isn't an authentic one. So some of these things I was thinking about that are sort of checks for authenticity, you know, taking a step back and thinking what you stand for. You know, companies especially, you know, have their core values in place. And I think this is a really great time, especially now, to take a step back and say, are we living those values? You know, are we making statements that are in line with the values that we have always said we practice? And I think there's a lot of folks that are going through a value reset at the moment. I can tell you that as a team at Barefoot, you know, we've been around 10 years now, and we are proud of the values we've always tried to live by, but we're going through a process right now, like so many others, where we're saying, hey, do the values that we say we live and die by, like, are they really what matter the most to us in this moment? And in fact, like, some of them are, but we're missing some things. And I think that a lot of folks need to take that step back and kind of run that filter of, are our values still in place? You know, I also think it's important to take a step back and think about what you're passionate about. You know, if I go out there and I start talking about a certain issue or a certain cause, and I feel like it's really relevant to the times, but I'm not really sure how it connects to my own personal passion, am I being authentic in that, right? Like, or is there a way for me to connect my own personal passions to something that is really relevant? And so I think that that's another filter too. It's, again, take a step back. Like, what do you as a human care about? Are you doing this because you truly believe in it? And it doesn't mean you always have had to make, move a needle in something. It just, can you defend it by explaining how it ties to you as a human and what you care about? I think it's really okay to bring all of these different elements to the table. You ask why now versus, any other time when you would consider life being a little bit more normal. So much we've heard in this moment, the importance of storytelling, the importance of communications in this moment. And the primary reason is connectedness. People are so incredibly disconnected in this moment. Even as we move towards reopening and we move towards whatever the next normal is going to look like, connection is going to be critical, whether it's just for your own sanity or just to make sure that people know you exist and what you stand for and how you're helping and how you're contributing. Being able to share that personal and professional makes you far more relatable. And I think it also really contributes to your own vulnerability. And as we've all sort of seen during this time, being vulnerable is something that we're all experiencing, whether publicly or privately. And being able to sort of share a little bit of that vulnerability, I think makes you incredibly more relatable to more people. And at the end of the day, we all are looking for ways to be memorable, whether as humans or as companies or organizations. We want people to remember us for something. And typically we're going to make the assumption that all of us are good at the jobs we do or good at the services we provide, but we want to be remembered for the things that we care about and the things that we stand for. And so you really can only get that connection to people by sharing kind of from both of those sides of the fence. So, yeah.
Wow, Cori, I love that. I love the idea of an authentic checklist, like an authenticity checklist to check yourself. I think that's a brilliant idea, and I think you should create it and share it with the rest of us.
Well,
put that on paper.
Full credit goes to Sarah. The checklist idea was hers. So.
Well, let's do it. Let's share that broadly. I think that's brilliant. Blair, I wanna ask you. So you've got an incredibly powerful and unique storytelling tool with 9 News. You lead brand and marketing there. How is 9 News using this power to tell stories that really need to be heard? And kind of what do you guys consider as you create these stories, and what does that look like for you?
Yeah, well, thank you, Elizabeth, for having us. I've loved everything my peers here have shared. I'm just very fortunate to be here, and also in Colorado and working at 9 News. I think it's been, coming from Texas, it's been really fun comparison looking at, I was very involved in the city of Dallas and seeing here, and I just have such great thoughts about the city of Denver and everything this city does and the thought leadership that exists here. So I've been really inspired by that. I think as far as 9 News, it's really quick for people to assume that there's only one part of our storytelling, and that is to the external audience. And I'm really proud of the work we do in amplifying those voices. We have a lot of initiatives we've started rolling out. But I have to say the most important part of the work that we're doing right now is inside the house. And I think that in a world we live in, and a lot of us are leaders in our own organizations, a very loud world we live in, and this be responsive, get in there, say what you need to say. It's the quiet inside the house conversations that I think can be the most powerful. It's the story you're telling yourself, and it's the story your organization is having. And we've actually done quite a bit of work internally in saying, okay, what is our 70-year business doing to contribute to maybe even unintentionally to the problems of our world? And evaluating our story selection process, evaluating the people we have in our newsroom, evaluating the boardrooms and the makeup of those boardrooms, because we feel a great responsibility and a role and obligation to the community to serve the greater good. The challenge with that is there's a lot of work to do to unravel an industry that's been around for 70 years. And I think it's the least sexy kind of work, the undoing, and it's the least glamorous. And so when people want to see that immediate change, the unfortunate reality is the change won't maybe be seen right away, because you're having to uncover and pluck out all the layers. So I think for us, the end goal is amplifying voices and mirroring the community at large and serving the greater good. And that's for our consumers and constituents. But internally, I would say that's the most powerful work we've been doing right now. Being able to say, how do we get our heart and house right? I think that's the encouragement I have to most leaders is, it's one thing to be loud, but what are your dinner table conversations? What's the story you're telling yourself? What are the executive conversations looking like? And sustainability is going to be critical here, because storytelling is a mechanism that has connected us. It's the largest communication tool in the history of humanity. So for us, it's how do we get to that point where we make sure we're using our megaphone for good? So we've got a lot of work to do. I'm proud of those conversations. And I'll say, but to align with what Cori was mentioning about values, we've also recognized one of our values is we are inclusive. And when you have a value that is seemingly altruistic, it feels like betrayal when you don't live up to it. And I think we ourselves are doing a gut check of, okay, we can't have altruistic values anymore. We have to have values that we must operate within. And that's how we're looking at our storytelling right now, is with the magnifying glass.
I love that, Blair. You know, I think we hear that a lot, and I like how you dubbed it, which I'd heard, the get right with your heart and your house first, because you can't follow through on what you're saying otherwise. And I think that is such an important message for right now. I want to talk to all of you about performative activism, and wonder how much you know about it, what you've heard of it, what I know of it, and I want your take on this. And it kind of gets to that first question I asked you, Sarah, but performative activism is these companies that are coming out with Black Lives Matter, or blacking out their screens, and showing their support, but then not doing anything that the three of you just talked about. Talk to me about what kind of, maybe if you know more about this, more stories behind it, but what damage that can do. We've seen examples of some of this damage already with a lot of organizations, but I wonder, and Sarah, maybe I'll start with you on kind of your thoughts on performative activism.
You know, I think that's such a great question. And one, I think we can all do a gut check on it. And I think we own a responsibility to hold ourselves, our companies or organizations, and the brands we support through our money or likes or follows, responsible for doing something. But I think I actually walk a middle of the road line when it comes on this, because what I think is negative about it is obviously that at the end of the day, you're left with you. And I think anything we do for a pat on the back, a like, to sort of keep up with the move, like what's happening in greater society, is damaging to us as people. And it prioritizes a visual representation or a performative action or some statement over the actual hard work that happens. And so that's the negative. You know, the positive, I think, is that it sparks a conversation. And I am really, I think in this moment, a lot of companies are learning that lesson in a hard way, and in a way that we've never held them accountable before. And so, you know, what I want to sort of put out there, and a challenge to all of us on this call and sort of within us, is to say, you know, is it bad when all of a sudden we take that action to then say, gosh, you know, you know, where were you, you know, New Balance a year ago when your company, you know, one of your senior presidents gave a lot of money to the Trump campaign to sort of, you know, fight against some, you know, import-export law or something like that. And you know, where were you? Like, you're saying you're this holistic, you know, really caring company, but man, if you're not checking your senior leadership, and that's our role. I think, you know, as consumers, we've gotten super lazy. Like, we have taken a lot of these messages and just said, like, check a box, that makes me feel good. And what I want to challenge everybody to do is say, don't just check the box, and don't just get mad. Reach out, you know, challenge them on social, stop putting your money where those places are. And so the positive is, if we can all take that step forward, I think those actions actually do us a lot of good.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here too. I completely agree with Sarah. I'm definitely on the same page that there are positive and negatives to this concept. You know, something else that I'll just throw out there is kind of this, we've worked a lot with this with our clients who have a desire to put something out there to make that statement. But kind of going back to some of the other things that have already been said on this call, we really challenge them to say, before you do that, let's take a look at the house, sort of like what Blair was saying. Like, are we prepared to make this statement and then have someone pull the curtain back and say, can you really back this statement up? What have you done to this point? And if you haven't done anything, what's the action you're going to take? I had a great conversation. We work a lot with Mile High United Way, and Tasha Jones, their new CMO. She is a fantastic leader and just joined the team over there. And I had a great conversation with her, I think it was last week, where they did put a statement out as a community-based organization focused on strengthening communities. They put this statement out earlier this month, and now they're really looking inward and saying, okay, we said this, but what are we actually going to do to make a change? And as a funder in the community, they have a huge power where they can put their money into action that's happening around them. And totally understand that that's not the case for everyone, but it is just a really great example of an organization that, you know, everyone would assume already had these feelings and kind of these policies in place, but now they need to even make a bigger step forward and sort of call on other funders and their peers in that community to do the same. Like, what action can we do collectively? Because we can't do things on our own, and we do need to work together to make those things happen. But, you know, it kind of goes again back to those filters of authenticity. Like, if you're going to make these statements, how do you back them up with action?
Yeah, really good point, ladies. Working in a journalistic space, there's these expectations that we have to be in the middle of the road. And what we have had a discussion on is why? Why do we have to be in the middle of the road? And we're having these really thought-provoking, again, going back to the system in which we've been operating has told us, here are the rules, here's the conduct, and this is what it looks like. And in many times, society has decided it for us. So one of the things, specifically talking about Black Lives Matter, society might say it's a partisan issue. Well, we decided it's not. We had a conversation, we said, this is not a partisan issue. What does operating in our integrity look like? And that means we're gonna tear down the idea that this is a partisan issue, and we're gonna say, this is a human issue. And those are the kind of conversations of what does it look like to operate in integrity, which really is the foundation of journalism in its own right. But people have decided what journalism is for us. So we've had to ask ourselves, again, the house, right? These questions of what does integrity mean? And what does operating in our values look like? And probably one of the most important questions, especially all of us who are business leaders, what are we willing to give up to gain? And I think that's the biggest challenge right now, that when we know for a fact when the business community supports ideas, things happen. That's how America runs. When business supports change, change actually happens. That's where the money is, that's where the decision makers are, that's where the power is in many aspects. And so we can't just rely on certain, government or the people to make these changes. We need business, because business is going to be the ones that dangle the money to say, if you don't change, I'm not giving you this. You look at the story that VF has done lately, refusing to spend on Facebook until changes are made. It's a case study in our own backyard of true activism. So I think that word's scary journalistically, activism, but I always go off of the policy of, if you err on the side of angels, in that it's for the common good and it serves a greater good. And those that think it's harm is just those that it maybe doesn't benefit, but it doesn't harm them. That to me is really what we're going through. So we're creating a new playbook, which is risky in our business because people want us to be in the middle, but at times I think middle is actually the scariest. I think apathy can be the scariest trait because that in many ways is saying something. So I look forward to action. I think for us, we have to be careful on what we say are coming from the mouths of our journalists. However, our brands can speak and our money can speak. So we're evaluating our grant funding. We're looking at how are we supporting our backyard and how are we creating that, equity and equality in our backyard as well. So I think I think in journalism, there's a cop-out and excuse at times that we can't advocate, but there's many, many ways we can that are appropriate and necessary.
I'm so glad to hear 9 News took that stance and decided this is a human issue and it's not bipartisan. And that's what we all need. That's breaking down those barriers or those systems that have been in place for so long that we just stick with. So kudos to you guys. Talk about, and for whoever wants to unmute first here, but kind of pivot strategies, and you've all mentioned this a bit, but how are we pivoting right now in working with clients or working even internally at 9 News to talk about, communication and what tactics we're using? I think maybe our audience would love to hear not just the pivot strategies, but when do you pivot? What does that look like? When do you pivot back? What does that feel like? I know pivot is the word of the quarter here. Adjust is what I'll say. Cori, you unmuted first. Go for it.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I think that flexibility is just the name of the game in these times. And that's just something that we've been pushing hard with our clients and with ourselves. And it's just a trait that I think we're all having to embrace in this moment for a lot of reasons. So much is unknown and things are changing at every given moment. And whether that is related to health and safety or civic unrest, like whatever it might be, so much is just unknown. And so we really need to focus on being flexible. And that's with our operations as companies, as individuals, our day-to-day lives, but also in our communications tactics. It's interesting because as communications professionals, we like to work with clients and say, hey, let's plan ahead. Let's build a plan. Let's talk about how we can continue to be proactive and tell certain stories during the year, but always reserve a certain amount of space and energy for being reactive, right? And we've sort of had to flip that on its head. Being reactive is something that we're just continuing to have to do in this moment. We have seen a number of things having to pivot. We've worked with clients who were planning to launch organizations in the middle of this crisis, right? That obviously didn't happen, and we've had to pivot the strategy and make the conversation feel more relevant. And that kind of goes back to this idea of making sure, like another filter, are you being tone deaf to the moment? Is this the time to push this out? Is this the time to tell this story? Now, there was definitely a period where you had to be extra cautious, where everything needed to be about health and safety, responding to COVID, responding to the community. I think as we move forward, we need to continue to not be tone deaf to the times, but at the same time, think about how we can start to change the conversation a little bit. Folks are eager for positive news. They're eager for knowing what's coming next, what the future holds, even if we don't entirely know. But there are ways to start to integrate those pieces of message into what we've been experiencing these last few months. I think another thing too, with regard to pivoting, when you think about the ways in which as a company partner with the community, Sarah and I, we did a presentation with Be Civic a while back talking about how you can continue to support the nonprofit community during this crazy time. And I still think it holds really true now, as much as it did a few months ago, that you have these community partners. Now is not the time. And I'm so sorry, my dog is totally losing it in the background, so hopefully you can't hear that as much as I can. But now is not the time to walk away from those commitments or walk away from those partnerships, but it might be the time to pivot the impact that they're having, right? So you may have always supported one event or one program and you've had a reason for doing that, but now might be the time to take a step back and say, hey, partner, what do you need in this moment? And it might be completely different than what you were expecting or what you've always done to date. But again, that's a great opportunity to pivot the engagement, and it's a good story to tell for you as a company. It helps build that brand, but you're also supporting the needs the community has right now. So again, best laid plans often go awry, even in normal times. So I think just remembering flexibility is just really the name of the game right now.
Well, I love that advice about asking what they need, your current partners, and adjusting that way. Sarah, you unmuted as well. Blair, I saw you as well. You'll be next.
I just wanted to take this to a personal moment because in some ways it's so much easier to talk about my life pivoting as a professional, but it's a lot harder for me to talk about how I've done that as a human, just as me. And I am someone who really likes to remain in control of my life. And I sit down at the start of every year and build out a plan. This year I worked with a business coach and really sat down at the start of the year and mapped out some goals and just philosophies around kind of the 4 quadrants of my life: home, professional, community, and me as a human. And I got to tell you, I thought I was really in charge. I was so proud of what I thought I was committing to. And March came and all of a sudden those quadrants blurred so much. And you know what I realized, and what was sort of a blessing for me, and it was really uncomfortable when it happened, was I wasn't leaving space for the unexpected. You know, I'd spent so much time filling every moment, filling every quadrant, really thinking about what I was going to do and how I was going to get there, that I wasn't thinking about the fact that sometimes I just want to show up for my friends or my coworkers, and commit that space. And so this is a really beautiful time for me to embrace the fact that I actually don't know what's going on. And as a result, I crossed a lot of stuff off my list and was like, you know what, this is going to take away from my ability to respond to something that I don't know about yet. And that was super uncomfortable for me. So that's just kind of like a story. It's really personal. But I think, you know, as really highly motivated professionals, we sometimes forget about that element of surprise in our own lives because we're trying to be so in control, or maybe that's just me, but I just thought I would share that as a personal piece.
No, that's very fair to say. And I think we all can acknowledge we're in a season of VUCA, which is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I think in a world where you get to a leadership position based off the wisdom you know, or the plan you have, or the I've done this before and the muscles you've used and trained, it's really a scary world. I think you're seeing a new form of leadership right now, to piggyback on both of your comments, that I think we need more of. And the strongest leaders right now, I would say, instead of concentrating so much on tactics, it's like, how are you pivoting your style? How are you looking within to say, am I convicted? What am I doing that? I think we want to jump straight to tactics. We want to go, we got to update this, we got to do this, we got to do our procedures, we got to do our policies, and it feels dry. When you look at Black Lives Matter and you look at this pandemic, this is humanity we're dealing with. It's an emotionally charged world we're living in, rightfully so. And so we have to meet that. Maybe not, I'm not saying in a go yell and shout, and it's more about we have to meet the feelings that our world has right now with our leadership styles. So I've seen and sensed the strongest leaders right now are those that are okay with the VUCA, and they have the emotional capacity and the resilience and the conviction and the vulnerability to be able to say, you know what, we've been getting it wrong. And just being able to own up to that is the first part. We want to jump straight to results. We want to jump straight to tactic. We want to jump straight into our strategic planning and saying, let's change it all, and let's do a diversity training, and but the reality is we have to sit in this season with people, and we have to meet them where they are. And so I think that's the hardest part, is it's very, very uncomfortable. But if we don't get more comfortable with being uncomfortable, I don't think we're going to be able to move forward. You have to sit in the mess. One of my favorite quotes through this has been, in chaos comes new order. And we keep talking about this new normal. You have to be okay with the chaos. You have to be convicted in the chaos. And instead of saying, okay, now what? Let's move our world back and rebuild it to something new. It's like, well, let's think about, why did we get here? Let's hear, let's listen, let's be convicted and have those conversations. So I think those are some of the biggest things. Instead of jumping to tactics, it would be my recommendation to say, what are you doing to evolve your style and pivot your style to meet a world of VUCA?
I like that. Blair, I'm going to ask you, can you type VUCA and what that stands for into the chat feature? Because I want to capture that. I haven't heard that one before. That's great. And I like that. I like the thought of, you know, we've all heard slow down, listen, learn, educate yourself first before you act. But to really do it right, it's taken how many years? 400 plus years to create the situations we're in now. So it's not going to be overnight. And, you know, we have to keep this conversation very much alive, and it's going to be up to each of you, each of us to do that. And I want to talk about that a little bit more, but we do have a question that came from registration from Jennifer Hallam, asking specifically, how do you balance, and this goes to kind of what you were saying also, Blair, but how do you balance COVID fatigue with COVID passion? How are we talking about that?
Well, I'll speak to that, because that's what we're doing right now in a newsroom. And I want to also iterate, like, our business was built on reaction. So in fact, our biggest problem is strategy. And our product is current events. So I think reaction is what we're built for. And so I'm really proud of that. But at the same time, it's dangerous, because you just want to go, go, go. And before this call, it's like balancing it is, we're not in breaking news anymore. We are, this is our life now. And so I think there's a part of acceptance there. I think that there is a reality of how are you encouraging your employees and yourself to truly unplug, to step back and get into your center of what is the best thing to do as a leader in your organization. When we're all on hamster wheels all day, we're not going to effectively change the systems that have been built for 100 years. And we're also not going to change systemic racism in this call. You know, I think it's like taking the pressure off of a lot of the just Americans in general and society in general. It's like we want to solve things so quickly. So I think there's some grace we need to have with ourselves. And I myself have had to do a lot of that work, and just being okay with one step at a time and moving forward and saying that out loud to your staff. You know, I had a conversation before this call of the passion. You have so many opinions coming your way on deciding what's best for your organizations. And you just have to almost come back and saying, I'm hearing a lot of opinions. I'm going to sit on this and think on this, and I'll get back to you in a couple weeks. This reality of like responding right away is actually, I don't think, going to be most effective. Consumers want to know what you're doing, and they're watching. They want to know what you're doing. They're going to check in on you. That black square you posted or that comment you said, they're going to check in a year and say, okay, how are we doing on that? You know, so I think that's the most effective leadership right now. Is I would rather be an organization that, yes, is present in the conversation now, but more importantly, when the news cycle's over, which I already sense in many ways, it feels that, unfortunately, is how do we show up in a few months and say, here's our plan by 2020, we're going to have this X and Y measurements. I think that balance is the pressure off of today and creating a thoughtful, sustainable plan that allows you to chip at it each day.
Cori, after you.
I can jump in here too. Yeah, Blair, I think all of that is fantastic, and I appreciate all of those thoughts, and I'm definitely on the same page. I think I'll go back to the question too of just that the COVID fatigue when it comes to what you want to be communicating, and sort of on the same note as what Blair said, it's important to take a step back to remember that people are just generally overwhelmed, that it isn't just they're overwhelmed by the messages you're sharing with them. They're overwhelmed by the dogs barking in the background, the internet going down, their kids, whatever it might be. There are so many things that are overwhelming all of us in this moment that fatigue isn't just about the communications that you're sharing. So it's sort of going back to that, it's not just about you, it's about the things that all of us are experiencing. But that being said, I mentioned this before, this idea that people just, we are all we want right now is information. I'm trying to think the best way to say that, but all of us are looking for information, whether it's on how we can be the safest and the healthiest in our communities, how we can respond to this civic unrest that's happening, how we can deal with, the fact that school may not be starting in the fall, like all of this stuff. Like, we are desperate for information. So as organizations that have stories to tell, that have updates to share, figure out, what are the most relevant things that you can share so that people have a little bit of comfort in knowing you're working on it, right? We tell our clients that all the time, like, you may not have the answer yet, but maybe we can help with some of this fatigue by just checking in and sharing that story, being vulnerable in the moment, reminding them that we're with you in this. We don't have the answer. This is that time for transparency. As PR people, we push our clients to be transparent in everything as much as possible, even when we can't share all of the details. But people want to know that you have a plan in place, right? Like, you may not know the answers, but you're working towards it. So, I think that's at least maybe something to consider. And at the end of the day, like, as Blair said, don't put it all on your shoulders. Like, we can't fix the fatigue and it's going to continue for a lot longer, but we can continue to sort of reach out to folks and touch on the things that they're actually looking for and not just the things that they feel like they're hearing every day.
Love it. You can't fix the fatigue. That's true. So what can we do, you guys? What can we do to ensure, this media cycle doesn't end? How can we check back in? I think, internally, Cori, to your point, we're doing what you just mentioned at the foundation. I mean, we're really looking deep inside and wanting to figure this out in the right way. I mean, and we've got work to do. We've got lots of great plans and strategies, and how we talk about that is important, but how we act on it is more important, right? And so how do we keep this going in an authentic way? Because I like what you said. Blair, you said it too. We're not going to fix this right now on the call. None of us are going to have the perfect statement or the perfect plan, but to do something and at least to be transparent is really what's key right now. And so how can we keep this going? Blair, you unmuted. You go, please.
Well, I'll go back to my VUCA, and if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen really quick with an image. So on the flip side of VUCA, there's V for vision. So it's kind of like, how do you get people to graduate out of that, the change and the rapid change, the motility, and move it to vision? And so I love the idea from Cori of create a plan. Well, it's sometimes the plan to build the plan, right? And I think sharing that is like, it's not like, okay, here's everything we're gonna do. It's just saying, here's how the framework on how we're going to build this. That in itself, I think people just want to know we're moving forward. So the one is, I would say, changes with vision. How do you graduate from uncertainty to understanding is critical. So understanding all the different perspectives, and that's part of this, right? We talked about sitting in the mess. You have to sit in the mess to understand it all. So it's taking all those opinions. We have 180 opinions at 9 News, and they're all important. But I'm not going to be able to put that in a bow and transfer that tomorrow. So it's building the framework and methodology and understanding all those perspectives. And then it's graduating from complexity to clarity. So what are you trying to solve? And we've talked about this at 9 News of what is our responsibility? It is not our responsibility to, probably completely change systemic racism, but it is our responsibility to make sure we have a lens in which all the stories we tell talk about the disparities in our systems and the inequity in our worlds. So I think it's figuring out what is your piece in the problem. Because if we all take the big problem on our shoulders, we won't see success because we'll give up. We'll be paralyzed by it. It's too big. And so I think clarity on understanding your focus and your contribution to that. And then the last is graduating ambiguity into agility. Being able to make those decisions. Yes, 180 opinions are coming in. We're going this way though. And we heard you. And I think people at times, they just want to know that they were heard and they understand the business. And at times, maybe it's if I had a conversation with an employee the other day, I said, I think you want our brand to do more than we ever will be able to do in social justice work, being a journalistic entity. So I really want you to think about if this is the right place for you to work. And that wasn't me saying your ideas don't matter here. It was your ideas are so great that unfortunately they don't particularly, our system won't allow for a lot of what you want from it. And I think that's fair as well. So I think there's a lot of conversations going, but I would say, how do you build this graduation in VUCA to the vision, understanding, clarity, and agility that it deserves?
Thank you, Blair. That's great. I really appreciate that. Sarah, did you have something to add? Sorry, please.
I am happy to move on, actually.
Okay.
That was,
yes.
Let that resonate. That was good and a lot to take in.
That's why I was hoping you were going to talk, because I was really sinking in, but that's good. I want to ask a question to each of you, and this is kind of the final question we like to end with each time is, and I recognize a lot of this has come up. You guys have provided a lot of wonderful tips and whatnot, but what can we do as this alumni community of leaders to help? And by help, I want you to kind of interpret that the way you want, but to help tell stories, to help do our part, to find our place, to be authentic. What can we do as a leadership community to really help what's going on? Sarah, go for it.
Yeah. So I think, one of the most important things to do is to recognize the fact that the idea of storytelling, so the idea of hearing firsthand from a human with a lived experience and passing that knowledge on, has a way to actually retrain our brains. So there's lots of great science called brain-to-brain coupling, rewires pathways. So I think that is the first thing. You have to acknowledge the power of that. The second thing with this group is that as leaders, we are in this really, really, really unique position to experience and to hear those stories firsthand, more so than maybe we even recognize. And so I think acknowledging that power, acknowledging that as leaders, we're often out and about to sort of roam, to opt in to hearing firsthand from people in communities where our circles aren't as connected is really important. And so understanding that like your brain has the opportunity to change, the opportunity for you to hear from someone else, to acknowledge the power of what they're saying, and that it can change your self-understanding, it can change your empathy, and that it can kind of motivate you to catalyze system change is important. The second thing as a leader that I think is really important is, so you've gone through that process. I think all of us have probably had this life-changing moment. I can tell you several in my own life, where you've heard from someone firsthand, it did a gut check, it changed the way you thought about the world. All of a sudden you're really motivated to do change. What I think we forget is that next step. So we then go into our companies and our organizations and say, I had this moment, this is the thing we have to commit to, we have to have that action. But what we forget is to connect that opportunity to hear firsthand from someone who has the power to tell from their firsthand experience, with our staff, with kind of our broader community. And so I think it's acknowledging that you can advocate for that ability. You can bring someone in, who has a really unique life story, give them the training and the platform that honors what they have to say and who they are as people, to create change both within your organization and externally. Shout out to 9 News. I think that's kind of the purpose of what you've done with some of your longer storytelling series, is saying, okay, we have this platform, we can honor and engage and help to train someone to tell their story in a really dynamic way, so that maybe it can extend that. But what it does, sort of that loop, is then, okay, so you've had that experience, you're now changed. You can catalyze change by bringing that experience to people inside of your sphere of influence, who then can sort of do the same thing. But I think what we fail to recognize is it takes that really intentional firsthand hearing or sharing of a story in order to really train our brains to do that. So that is my challenge to you, is don't forget the opportunity to hear from firsthand from people to catalyze change.
Yeah, I can jump in here as well. Hopefully you guys can hear me. I lost sound for a minute. Thumbs up. Yes. Okay, good. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think continuing to just have these conversations and to ask the hard questions, and also to listen to those around you. I think Sarah was touching on this, but then I went away for a second. So, but just this idea of, listening to those around you. And Blair, you mentioned this a little bit ago as well, this idea that people just want to be heard. So allowing them the space to be heard, and then determining how you can help to amplify their voice. We talk a lot about amplifying voices at Barefoot, and I think as leaders in the community, we all have platforms to help voices be amplified and be heard to broader networks. And I would challenge all of us about where are those opportunities for you to step in and provide that platform for others to be heard? Because it isn't just about our voices, it's about a community of voices and a community of opportunities and challenges, and together, like, we're going to find what that next step should be. It may not be the answer, it's going to take a long time to find the answer, but that next step, that process, is a collective thing that we need to work on together. So again, like, how we can all help is to provide your platforms for amplifying those voices, and keep asking hard questions and having these kind of conversations.
Yeah, that's really good. I would end with just like 4 C words, I guess, to just make it easy, at least for myself. And you kind of said it, Cori. Challenge yourself, and challenge when you see something and if your gut's telling you is wrong. I think that challenge goes with the other C word, which is conviction. I think that's what this network needs and should be doing, is challenging the systems, challenging the ideas, challenging when someone says, hey, we decided this and it was a safe call. I just had a conversation with my GM last night, and we went back and forth on something, and we said, you know what, we're going for it. And so I think you need to have that challenge and conviction. And then the other 2 is connection and counsel. So my LD 2020 peers have been massive, massive allies for me, as the work we're doing in Voices of Change initiative we just launched, and sharing the stories of the Black community. I have leaned on my Black peers, asking them if they had the willingness and bandwidth to help me. And I think their counsel has been empowering for me and solidified a lot of the intuition I've had. So I think counsel and offering that, and maybe saying, hey, how can I help you? is great. And then that connection of just sitting in it with your peers. I don't know if I could be getting by right now without my LD 2020 classmates. It's not that I don't know, I know I wouldn't be. And so I think that connection of just, this is really hard, is gonna be important. So those would be my recommendations, how to activate this group.
I love it. You guys, it's like you're in the business of telling stories because you all just so eloquently told these wonderful tips. And Blair, what you just said is a wonderful segue. First, I just want to thank all of you. Sarah, Cori, Blair, thank you for sharing your time, your talents, your expertise. That is incredibly insightful for us. I would like to ask the audience, who I also like to say thank you for being on the call this morning. If you have any takeaways or thoughts or phrases that you've learned from this, throw them in the chat feature as I wrap up. We'd love to see kind of what you've gotten from all of this. And I want to just promote our next few virtual voices that are coming up. We've got one on July 16th about community collaboration. Cori mentioned United Way. We're going to have Christine Bonero and some other folks on that will really talk about the power of that community collaboration and how it is helping right now through everything happening. We're also going to do a part 2. We had a virtual voice last week, or a couple weeks ago now, I can't recall the date, on disparities surrounding COVID. It was incredibly raw, authentic, and warranted a part 2 for sure. So we're going to bring in 3 amazing speakers also to talk more about disparities and racial equity on July 30th. So we hope you all can join us there as well. Finally, I just want to kind of double back on what Blair was saying. Unintentionally, she helped with this, but you all are our best advocates, our best recruiters for our programs. We've got Leadership Denver and Impact Denver applications are currently open. These programs, as Blair said, are giving so much to people during these times. And I think these upcoming classes are really going to lend to such a historical moment in our world that being a part of a leadership program right now is going to be incredibly impactful and a different experience than any of us have experienced to date. So I do hope that you all will consider recruiting somebody, suggesting somebody. July 8th is the deadline for Leadership Denver. August 4th is the deadline for Impact Denver. We hope you will send folks our way. And again, thank you all so very much for your time. Again, Sarah, Cori, and Blair, thank you for your time. Thank you, everyone, and we'll hopefully, see you soon.